All right. So just as a quick note, this session is being recorded. The recordings will be available to you in your GOTV hub. We'll also work to get them distributed online after this training. But you are in the first session of our GOTV workshop series. This is drafting your GOTV plan. I'm Jess Weldon. I'm going to be facilitating this one today. I'm the training director here at Arena. I already mentioned earlier that I'm based in Austin, Texas, and I have a little bit of GOTV experience that I kind of want to share with you, just a little bit on my background. So before I came here, immediately before, I was the programs director at a civic engagement organization. It was not a campaign. So I do have experience running program for that side. And then I also, before that, was the GOTV director for a presidential primary. So definitely have hard side experience too, not just on large races, also at the county level. I was the organizing director for a county party here in Texas. So have a whole bunch of varied GOTV experience and hoping to bring a whole bunch of different perspectives to this work today to make sure that the session is as applicable to everyone as possible. Just a few important notes though, because there are so many of us in the room and we are all coming from a bunch of different organizations. So please just remember that we have multiple different campaigns, some hard side, some soft side, some C3s, all in the room with us together today. And we want to make sure that we're not giving any specific pieces of strategic advice to any specific campaigns. So when you ask your questions, we are happy to answer them in a very general way that gives information about how you might approach a scenario that you're facing. But make sure that you're using the anonymous question feature so you're not giving away any pieces of your strategy to anyone else. And we also really appreciate if you vote for the questions that you want answered first, because there's almost 100 of us and our numbers are climbing. We're going to get a lot of questions today. It will help me so much to prioritize which questions to answer first. If you go into the Q&A box and you click the little thumbs up next to a question. So if we could get a little practice, great. Myra has done a test question in the Q&A box. If you could go in there and just give a thumbs up to that test question, just so I know everyone knows how to find that. Y'all are on top of it. Look at us go. We're up to 20 likes. This is still Myra, but anonymous. Myra's giving everything away. You can like either of Myra's two questions. Pick your favorite. All right, great. Anybody having trouble finding the Q&A feature? You can raise your hand or just... okay, Nick, Myra, do you mind just talking through how to find it? I can. Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm so sorry.
No worries. There's a lot of changes in Zoom, so depending on which version you have, it may be in the same location, but down near where you would open your chat or view your reactions or share your screen, there is a little quote box with a question mark in it that says Q&A. If you open that, it opens a panel, and in that panel, you have the ability to type your question. When you're typing your question, you'll have the ability to check mark send anonymously if you're talking about campaign strategy.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Myra didn't know I was going to say that, so thank you very much, Myra. Okay, so that's voting. Another quick thing, we do have a whole bunch of people in here. Some of us are currently in paid campaign or movement roles. So if you're in a paid role on an organization or you're currently in GOTV mode, let's try to prioritize questions from those folks. If you're looking for a role and you have, maybe even if you have an academic interest in this, I know we have a few students who are here with us today as well. We still want to hear your questions, but this is a GOTV workshop series so that people who are in the field doing the work right now can get all of the questions answered that they need to be able to do their jobs well. So let's prioritize those folks, letting those folks ask their questions first. So if you can just hold your questions towards the end of the presentation, if you're not currently on a campaign, that would be great. And I care about voting so much that I put it in there twice, but this time, vote in green. We've already been through that. All right. Next up, the good stuff. One more thing, anonymous questions. Even if you turn on the anonymous mode, if you give away identifying information about who you are and what campaign you're working on, that's not really anonymous. So instead of asking something like, I'm the executive director of Stop Farquad PAC, we want to knock on 20,000 doors in Swamp County, should we use the support score of 12 plus because we are? No. Try to make it a little bit more general if you can. So a better way to phrase the question, think about the context that you're in that might be applicable to other organizations that are working around you as well. How should we approach targeting at a county level for canvassing, specifically thinking about suburban counties and red states? That's a question that's way more applicable, that is not giving away any information about strategy, and we're happy to answer. Okay. If you slip up, I'm just going to say, hey, I can't answer this question. Can you rephrase it? It's no big deal. Don't stress out. An anonymous participant said, great work. You have the setting so it's not possible to copy info from the chat area. Can you change that? We're not going to copy paste the chat this time, but if you put in the chat what you want to get out of it, we'll be happy to like put links and things like that in there. We just want to make sure that people are free to interact in the chat in a way that's authentic without having to worry about being on the record all the time. Okay, if you're ready to start talking about GOTV plans, let's get an emoji in the chat. How are you feeling? Any emoji. Oh my gosh. Candace, I feel like that's the one that you usually pick. All right, sweet. Here we go. So GOTV plans. Here's what we're going to be talking about for this session. First, we're going to just dive into what the plans are, how you should use them, who should be involved in the planning, and any processes that we can use to plan effectively. Then you're going to see a document. It's a long document. It's a 27-page GOTV plan document. You're probably not going to write 27 pages about GOTV yourself. So we'll talk about the elements of what a bare bones GOTV plan would have, how to start, and then how to build it up from there. And then after we talk through that, we'll start to actually build a GOTV plan of our very own right now. We'll have an opportunity to go through section by section for the ones that we're going to cover. So, we have the targeting session coming up. We have messaging and scripts. We're about to be in calendaring later this afternoon. We'll have time to start thinking through the types of questions and the pre-work that we might need to do to be able to write those sections of the plan, and have an opportunity to block time on your calendar to work on the plan and collaborate with your team. And if somehow we make it through all of that, then there is a breakout session at the end that we'll be able to spend some time getting to know each other and talking collaboratively about a few different scenarios. So let me know in the chat when, if ever, if you've ever seen one, when was the first time you ever saw a GOTV plan? You can say what campaign, or you can just say however many years ago. Maybe you've never seen one, and that's okay. Yeah, some of us have never seen one. Sometimes, you might work on a campaign, be doing GOTV, and not ever see a GOTV plan. Never. If you've never seen one, feel free to let us know. Why do you think that is? My shirt. This is an old Roots Camp shirt. Yeah. It was a long time ago. Maybe people don't plan. You've done the GOTV, but never seen one. Yeah, Roots Camp was the best. I agree. All right, so all of us here are going to see a GOTV plan today, and I hope that you bring it with you onto whatever campaign or whatever organization you're working with, and you share it so that no one in our work is in the situation that they've never seen a GOTV plan before. So a lot of times we don't actually share our GOTV plan with people because we feel like it's not done. It's not ready for anyone to see it yet. And then all of a sudden it's GOTV and we started drafting this plan, but we haven't had an opportunity to make it exactly how we want it. So we just move forward and don't ever share it out. That means that no one actually even has an idea of what the outline of the plan is. So instead of thinking of the GOTV plan as a blueprint for everything that you might do and a document that people can read and digest, think about it as a tool that maybe you're responsible for outlining it, but other people aren't just going to be reading it. They're going to be adding to it. They're going to be giving feedback. You're really just using it to share what you're thinking about, get their ideas going. So this is kind of a jumping off point for conversation and align with your team. It's going to be a work in progress. It's going to be a work in progress until election day. It's probably not really ever going to be 100% finished to where you want it. And so I strongly recommend that after GOTV is done, after the election, after you've had your nap, you take 2 hours and just kind of go through the plan and write down what you thought and what you actually did. Okay. So who's involved? It depends. It depends on what type of organization or what type of campaign you're working on. So it might be, if you have a GOTV director, that the GOTV plan is owned by the GOTV director. Maybe you don't have one and maybe the campaign manager is in charge of this. Maybe it's an executive director. Maybe you're at an organization and you're not on a campaign. But it could also be whomever takes the initiative to create one. It might be a situation where no one's even thinking about GOTV planning yet. You might have to do, or you might choose to do, a little managing up or managing laterally, start the draft of the GOTV plan, and then kind of share it so it can be a collaborative document that people can contribute to. The people who are contributing to it should be, theoretically, every single person on the team who is responsible for planning program. So if someone is deciding we're going to do this on this date, or we're going to spend this money on this thing, they should be contributing to the GOTV plan. Particularly budget managers, anyone who is managing a budget should have eyes on the GOTV plan because it has extreme spending implications. And anyone who's responsible for approving spending, approving scripts, approving creative, anything like this, they should be contributing to the GOTV plan too. I'm going to pause here for questions. If you have any questions, take this moment to drop them in the Q&A and we'll answer them. It's weird that I can't see if people are typing or not, so. Okay, great. So we have a question: how is campaign GOTV different than, say, county party GOTV efforts? I love that question. Let's hold on to it for the coordination section, but I'm really excited that people are already thinking about how these things interact, or how organizations and campaigns can interact with one another. All right. Hopefully we've driven this point home, but please make sure to include the expertise of your team in decision-making all the way from the planning process onward. And I got ahead of myself. So here are the sections that you will see in your GOTV plan. I'm going to share one with you in mere moments. So the first section is usually a strategic overview. This is a very high-level summary of the entire plan. If your plan is going to be relatively short, you might not need to include this section. Then it will go into the timeline. Essentially, what are you planning to do and in what order? We'll talk about best practices for a timeline next session. And then there's the budget. This is maybe the piece that takes the longest, but hopefully you already have a campaign budget that you can fine tune for GOTV. Maybe the second most time-consuming and intensive process is the universe. And when we say universe, we're talking about which of our voters we need to contact in order to win. Then the tactics section will dive into what you have to do to contact them. So are you going to call them? Are you going to knock on their door? Are you going to serve them some digital ads? How are you going to layer these different tactics so that the voters are getting the message across multiple modes? And of course, the operations section will detail how you're going to make sure that all of the logistics pieces for each of these programs are in place so that everyone is supported and they have what they need when they need it. Staffing structure. If you have a large staff, it's very likely that some of your staffing is going to change. People might take on more responsibility as GOTV approaches, or there might be people on your team that actually step back from their role and step into more of a field focused role or a voter protection role. So you can think through how to utilize the talent on your team to get done what you need to do. Then, like Jason's question, you can think about how you're going to be coordinating with other organizations. So if you have a county party that's running GOTV efforts, how are your efforts and their efforts going to complement each other? How are you going to be in communication? And how are you going to do all this compliantly? And then finally, at the very end of the session, or at the very end of the plan, there's a section for contingency planning. And that section is just to think through what types of things usually happen during GOTV that are kind of difficult to predict when they're going to happen or if they're going to happen at all, but they're common enough that we might as well be prepared for them. Things like a printer going down or maybe minivan going down, things like that, that you can kind of get ahead of and have a game plan for your team to be able to pivot if that situation happens. So any questions about the sections of the GOTV plan? If you had to pick three, that you think are the most essential, like it could not be a GOTV plan without these three sections, which three would you pick? You can drop it in the chat. Universe, tactics, budget. Some folks are saying calendar. This is interesting. Thank you all for humoring me. Great. All right, I'll show you what I think right now. So the way that I think about this, a very simple GOTV plan could literally just be a document that says, here is how we're going to do our budget. I think that is one of the more important ones. Here is our timeline for how we're going to do all these things. And here are the tactics that we're going to use. This is what I would say is the most simplistic version of a GOTV plan: a budget, a calendar, and a list of tactics. But how are you going to decide your tactics? What other critical piece of information might you need in order to determine which tactics to use? Capacity? What else? Universe? Yeah, great. Okay, so I did not include universe and capacity in this simple GOTV plan because GOTV has been happening since before we had access to the voter file in the way that we do now. But if you have access to the voter file, I believe that your GOTV plan will not be complete without the universe included as well. The order that you complete these kind of four doesn't really matter because the planning process is not specifically linear. And all of these, the calendar, the budget, the universe, and the tactics, you're going to be fine-tuning them, comparing them against each other, and kind of making adjustments to each as you move through the planning phase. And then once you have these four, then you kind of go back in and you say, okay, what do I need in terms of operational support? What are the implications in terms of my staffing, etc.? And you build the rest of the plan out from here. All right, feel free, if you have questions, drop them in the Q&A box, and I'll give you a minute to do that. All right, so where do you start? Like I said, any of these four is fine. Thinking about yourself and how you operate, how your brain works, let me know in the chat which of these sections you feel like you would be most likely to start first. Oh, interesting, interesting. We've got calendar, we've got universe, budget. Someone who didn't say calendar, because I said calendar too. I'd love to hear a different perspective. Someone who said something other than calendar, do you mind raising your hand to share where you're coming from? Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I think that knowing what your budget is going to kind of be precursor to everything else that you do, right? So knowing, if you have a large budget, you can start a lot sooner and GOTV a lot longer. The tactics that you use, if you have your budget set, you're going to know about the layering. And then also you're going to know how big you can stretch your GOTV universe out to based on the money that you have.
Okay, cool. It's interesting to hear how different people's brain works. Thank you for sharing that. Nicholas, go ahead, and then Lauren.
Personally, I think the calendar is probably the most fluid portion. So it's probably the most difficult to lock down, and it's probably going to change the most. Whereas I think no matter the timeline of stuff, you're always going to be sending mail. You're always probably going to be doing digital ads and canvassing and all of that. And you probably are going to have the same universe, but the timeline is probably the thing that's going to change the most, I would say.
That's interesting. Okay. That's a different rationale than how I think about it, but I can see that perspective too. Lauren, and then I'm sorry, Gregory, we're gonna need to move on, but hold on to your thought. Go ahead, Lauren.
Right. So I was thinking that depending on who you're targeting, the messaging and everything else might have to follow. So like for certain digital ads that I'm sort of doing with my work, it really depends on the state and sort of like the culture. And so there might need to be more digital ads or more budgeting and calendaring out compared to one state or county compared to another. And so that's why thinking of like who you're actually targeting, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Universe is. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that. That once I know exactly who I'm targeting, then I can be more strategic, at least in my brain, that everything else will follow, because certain digital ads and whatever you put out there, it might be different for a certain set of voters compared to another, because not everyone's a monolith. So that's how I was thinking.
And can I ask, are you coming from a digital background? It sounds like you might be.
A little bit, but this is all very new to me and interesting. So that's just where it just kind of, all of that just came from, because I just want to try to be as very, personalized as possible to people's experiences and such, especially when it comes to GOTV.
That makes a ton of sense. Thank you to everyone for sharing that. There really is not a wrong place to start, and you can attack this from whatever angle makes the most sense to you and whatever is more comfortable to you, because you're constantly going to be revising these things. And I would say, as a best practice, you'll need to have meetings to regularly check in on the calendar, the budget, your universe, and even your tactics and how your voter contact program is going. So you're going to be kind of constantly revising each section of this plan. I said earlier that it's not a linear process. This is the process that I personally would follow. And it's kind of how the workshop series is structured as a result of it being my personal preference, but this is definitely not exactly how it has to be done. The way that I would approach this is I would start with outlining just a very bare bones calendar and timeline, which we'll do in the next session. And I would work backwards from election day and just kind of put in all the dates that I know are fixed. And then I would kind of move on. From there, I would start to look at my budget and make sure that I have a good understanding of where we are as an organization and what we might theoretically be able to raise. And then once I kind of have that money number in my head, I'm like, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's how much we can spend. How many people can we actually talk to, given the staff that we have? And then from that understanding of our capacity, I go into my universe. Based on who my voters are in the universe, I would then think through how I would prefer to contact them. And we'll talk more in kind of the messaging and the voter contact session about which tactics you might use. And then I would make a staff schedule. And if I was going to hire, I would make a hiring plan. So those would kind of be the first like 7 things that I would do. And this is going to take a minute. This is going to take a few days to kind of get all of this done if you're working and planning. So you're going to need to put some time on your calendar to do all of these things. And you're probably going to need to meet with some other people. Once I have those 7, then if I know I have a budget to hire, but I just made a whole bunch of capacity estimates, I got to go back and revise those things. I can tackle the operations section. Then after the operations section, maybe that's going to make me think through some more things that I might want to put line items in or move money from this category to another. So I'll probably revise my budget and my tactics. And then once all of that is done, I'll probably reach out to my partners. I'll start coordination conversations and share a little bit about how I'm thinking about GOTV, ask them how they're thinking about GOTV. If there are places where we might want to overlap, I'll then revise my timeline. And then with the team, I'll start thinking through contingency planning. And somehow, if we're able to get all of that planning done and keep talking to voters and train our staff and do all of the things that we normally do in our day job and we have time, then I would write the summary that goes at the top. And that is how I would think through it. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about the process without giving you the actual document. So we're gonna drop a document for you in just a second. But before we do that, any questions about the process itself? I'll go back to this slide. Okay. As a CM, me and the candidate are the only people making decisions. How long would it take for us to complete this process? That depends. What I would recommend is schedule a meeting, make an agenda for the meeting before you go into it, so you have an understanding of everything that you're wanting to accomplish. And I would go back to these 4 things. If it's just 2 people, I would go into calendar, budget, universe, and tactics. I would spend probably 90 minutes, if you can, making sure that your budget is completely up to date. If you're already managing your budget, you already know that it's up to date and you just need to look forward, then you could schedule an hour for this. For the calendar, I think that the calendar, you'll have a really good outline at the end of the day today. So I think you could theoretically spend about an hour meeting with your candidate to talk about it. So after today, an hour on budget, an hour on calendar. I think the universe might take a little bit longer, and I'll let Santiago speculate about how long that might take. And then coming up with tactics, I think will be relatively straightforward since it's a relatively small campaign. So I would imagine that you would probably spend about an hour there. So there's about 6-ish hours of planning without the universe in there. So you could do that in 3 2-hour meetings, or you could probably schedule them in smaller chunks over the course of 2 weeks. Santiago, did you want to say something about the universe?
No, I think it can also vary in terms of time, but again, thinking about the places where you gravitate towards in this, sort of quadrant matrix, thinking about where you, feel most comfortable. And if you don't feel like you want to, you know, have the expertise to dive super deep into the universe, you can, there are simplified ways to approach it and still get what you need, just like anything in this process.
And yeah, just to build on that, I hope that when you leave this GOTV workshop series, a lot of this stuff is going to be done for you, or at least started. Okay. Do you often have to convince leadership to focus on this? No, I have never had to convince leadership to focus on this. This one, because there are so many budgeting implications, this one is a pretty easy sell for leadership. If you frame it in the context of, hey, we're about to spend all the way down to zero, which we'll talk about in a minute, or I guess on Thursday, we're going to spend all of our money kind of over the course of the next 2 months. We should have a plan for how to do that. That's usually a pretty easy sell. Getting them to actually schedule time with you might be a little bit harder. So having ways that you can review these things asynchronously, like not at the same time, having a document that people can leave comments on back and forth can be really helpful in getting leadership to be able to spend time on it when they're not busy doing other things. I hope that that answered your question. Would you revise this process at all for people working with orgs who are supporting GOTV for several endorsed candidates instead of a campaign itself? I think I would probably not. I'm trying to go back to this process. I think the way that I would think about this is that if you're endorsing several different candidates, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they're all going to be in the United States. They're all going to have probably a similar budget, because I think if you're endorsing a bunch of candidates that you're probably endorsing on a local level or at a certain like race level. So I'm going to say that I think they have probably about the same capacity. I think that they're probably going to have about the same amount of staff, and this is wild speculation on my part. But where I'm going with this is I would create kind of a boilerplate GOTV plan, and then I would add something on to the end of this process that is an additional period of getting feedback from the campaign, tailoring that boilerplate to be very specific to the needs of each district and each candidate, and then making sure that everyone on the team, on the candidates team, has an opportunity to give their feedback, et cetera, on the boilerplate. And I would make it very clear that when I'm giving a GOTV plan to a campaign that is like a boilerplate, I would say, I just tried to get this started for you. Y'all are the experts in your district. You know how to do this. Let's sit down, let's amend this plan, and let's create something that can really help us strategically. Adding on to this question, several candidates in several states. Yeah, I think same process, but calendaring and timeline is going to take a little bit longer because you're going to have different deadlines in each state, especially with compliance deadlines, reporting deadlines. You really want to spend a little bit of additional time once you have that boilerplate, making sure that all of your calendar and timeline are very, very specific to each state, going through with a fine-tooth comb. The worst thing that you can do is put the wrong deadline for something that a campaign is relying on. So making sure that you have multiple sets of eyes, feedback is going to be even more important, and revision. Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead and drop them in, or we're going to move on. Cool. Okay, so how would this work for a school district? About the same. So let's look at the plan. Let's figure out how we can adapt the plan for different types of districts, et cetera. And then maybe we'll have some more specific questions too. So we're going to make our own GOTV plan document. We are rolling out a new arena tool to you today before it's even on the website. Lucky you. If you're watching this recording post, sorry that you weren't here. You're witnessing history right now. So let's go ahead, if my team could drop that link in the chat for the GOTV plan. I can probably find it too. I'm not helpless. There we go. Great. Thank you. Go ahead and make a copy of that document. So here is what you could do. You could go, if you haven't yet, into your hub. You could go into your Google Drive folder. You could click on the drafting your GOTV plan. And you could find the link to this plan that we dropped in the chat right in here. Once you have this guide open, go ahead and put a plus in the chat so I know you're ready to move on. Looks like someone lucky is an anonymous armadillo. I wish it was me. I have a family of armadillos living around me, and I love them. All right, we've got 60 total viewers in the doc, but we've got 100 people in this session, so we're gonna give it just a little bit to get a few more folks into this document, because you won't be able to do the next part without it. It'll be really hard. Is anybody having trouble finding it? Cool. Maybe we could drop the link again. Chris, we are opening up this template. And then we're gonna move on. Okay, we've got, I'm gonna have to leave you guys in the dust. I know. There's cool people in here. Badger. An auroch. Wow, isn't an auroch like a prehistoric cow? I think that aurochs are extinct. Oh, maybe that, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. All right, so you're gonna need your own copy of this. You're gonna need your own copy of this document. So click here to make your own copy. Go ahead and click that. And then click on make a copy. It's thinking, everyone's making a copy at the same time. All right, and then where it says at the top, copy of GOTV Plan Guide 2024, make it your own thing. So I'm making it Shrek for Swamp, GOTV Plan. I'm gonna take the word guide out because this is what I'm gonna use to make it my own GOTV plan. And then you can change the title because this is your own document after all. And you probably don't need this click here to make a copy thing either. So now you have it. You have titled it. Sorry, Milo, I didn't know you would be offended by a page document. I like to see how things are going to print. I didn't know that was controversial. Okay, so you have this document. Let's quickly click on the document outline so you can see all of the stuff that you have access to. So when you click on the document outline, you're going to be able to click on different sections and just jump there. So if you're a person that was like, I would start at the budget, this is for you. Click on the budget and jump here. Because I'm going to ask you right now to find your budget document if you have one and you're using one, and paste it into your own document in a comment. So if you have a budget, highlight the budget section and comment with a link to your own budget. So later on, when you're working on this, you don't have to do any of that. should also say, if you don't have a budget or you want an example budget to use for our budgeting session on Thursday, you can check out our arena tool. That is, maybe I linked out to the wrong thing. Alas, we have an arena budgeting tool. Santiago, did I take them to the wrong place? I think that I did. I think something broke. I'll fix it. We have a budgeting tool. It's in the budget. It's in the toolbox. There it is. There's a link for you in here in the chat. And here it is, campaign budget. So in my Shrek for Swamp, I would just link to my own budget. Okay, so before we keep going on the plan, I also want to highlight that there is a little bit of pre-work. Yeah, change it in your copy. Sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat. All right, so there is a tiny little bit of pre-work that you might consider for the budget section. So if you're coming to the budget session, you'll need to start making sure that these things are done probably right now, or at least scheduling them to be done. So as I've said before, make sure that your current budget is up to date because we're going to use that current budget. Meet with your fundraising team to get a good understanding of projections. If you haven't started thinking about how much money you are projecting that you might be able to raise before the end of the election, now is a good time to schedule that. If there are any other meetings that you need to schedule, now is a great time to do that too. So that's the pre-work for the budget session. Okay. Looking back at this document, is there a section? Actually, let's do this. Put in the Q&A which section you want to talk about next, and then we'll vote on them. Spencer said calendar. Another person said calendar. Tactics and universe. Ooh, targeting and universe. Tactics. Wow. Okay. Santiago, I think that there might be a request for a preview of the universe section. So I'll do my best to talk people through it, but Santiago is the architect of this section, so I'll definitely pass it off to him in just a second. Actually, Santiago, if you're ready, I can pass it off to you right now.
Yeah, and if you want to scroll through, there, one of the things that we'll cover in depth on Wednesday with respect to Universe is that there are two components of it. There's in van, the actual like pulling of the list and using target scores for support and general election turnout. This document has some preview of some recommendations that we have around some parameters that you can create to set up what's called a base universe. You might already have a base universe that you're using. This might just be a slight adaptation of that universe. But there are certain considerations to include there. So that's part one. Part two or part one, depending on the order, again, this is a non-linear process, are your capacity estimations around your ability to reach voters. So that can be both your budget and your organizing goals, what your organizers will be responsible for, any mail, paid media that might be complementing an organizing program, and thinking about how those things work together to be able to help you take this really massive list, or what could be potentially a massive list, and prioritize it. Because a universe that is 100,000 voters for a very small campaign with limited resources is not a good universe. So we don't want to lead you down the path of creating goals or a universe that is not realistic. And so in order to create a realistic universe, we recommend thinking about both the capacity estimates that you have for your team, what is your ability to reach those voters, and what are the parameters you use to be able to create sort of priorities, tiers 1, 2, 3 of how you're going to approach actually trying to reach those voters. And so that's what this section covers. And then it also helps you sort of fill in and document some of the counts that you get based off of this, so that for other parts of this GOTV plan, you'll know how these things all relate to one another. That's a
Cool.
little sneak preview.
Yeah, do you recommend in advance of the session tomorrow, any pre-work?
Yeah, one of the things that we'll explore is how to choose the right scores. So one of the things that I would do is go into your van, look at create a list, and look at what scores you have access to. And maybe you've already done this and and you're like, all right, I got my my candidate support score, or my Dem party support score, or my issue support score, depending on the type of campaign that you're using, and just take a look at the options that you have there. You may go in there and see a library of scores there and a bunch of things to choose from. And we'll lay out some recommendations on how you can choose if you have a lot of options. If you go there and you don't see anything, we'll talk through how you can make a request to get access to some of those, especially if you're working with a county party, or if you're working with the state party, or an organization like America Votes, who does C4 work, and how you can get access to some of those targeting resources in order to do that. And so think about those types of things. Think about who is going to be primarily responsible for constructing this universe. Sometimes teams are smaller, and you are both doing the capacity estimations and you're doing the building of that universe in van. So you're wearing both of those hats. Sometimes that's divided up between 2 people. And so sort of building those 2 things at the same time and meeting in the middle, and sort of figuring out the responsibilities within the team can take a little bit of work. And, again, making time so that people can collaborate on this through meetings is going to be also really important.
Cool. Thanks for that little sneak preview. And again, come to the targeting session. We go into great detail on how you can do this.
And more tool previews for you.
Yes, many tools, many tools. I see a lot of people wanting to talk through tactics. I'll orient you to what is included in the voter contact tactics section. And we'll kind of go through writing a script and how you might apply that script across different tactics in the session tomorrow. But so in the voter contacts tactics section, it's split into script elements. So you can decide which pieces of a good script you want to include in all of your scripts, and how you will capture the data that results from it. And then after the script elements, it goes into making a plan for each of the different ways that you might talk to voters. And I put a little note up here at the top somewhere that this is not comprehensive. So there are going to be some tactics like we don't talk about commit to vote cards in here. If you're running a commit to vote card program, you should definitely write that into your plan. And then there's also a whole bunch of tactics that you might not be using. So maybe you're not going to be using you're not planning to do self-rationalization questions or something like that, you can take this out. If you're not planning to run a paid digital program, you can take that out. This plan should be something that works for you. So we've got the script elements. We'll go through all of these in extreme detail tomorrow, so I won't belabor them here. But then you write your plan for how you're going to run each program. And I've listed out a few different questions that you might think about asking yourself to understand how to think through this program. So if you're going to have a Canvas program, is it going to be paid? If it's going to be paid, you need to factor this into your hiring ramp, and you need to make decisions around your calendar. And if you're going to hire a bunch of paid staffers, are they going to be people that are doing canvassing on the doors or on the phones or both? And most importantly, who is going to manage those people? Because if you plan to onboard a whole bunch of different paid canvassers, you also need to first hire a manager, at least one manager for that person, and train them. So this has real calendar implications. And if it's going to be a volunteer program, how are you going to factor that into your recruitment plan? We're also in this section talking about timing of when your program is going to start, and you probably would want to provide a little bit of information about capacity there too. So each of these tactics, again, we're going to talk about a little bit more tomorrow, but you have the opportunity in your plan to write them down. Candace, do you mind dropping your question in the chat or in the Q&A? I appreciate it. Okay. What else? What do you want to talk about next? That is okay. Drop it in the chat, or we can go back to our regularly. Excuse me. Okay. I saw someone mention training, GOTV training. No problem. Any other sections that you want to talk through? Okay. So looking at the GOTV training section, as we're adding in a whole bunch of new staff, you're getting a whole bunch of new procedures, and as we'll talk about, you're going to be thinking through reporting times, etc. You really want to talk about how you're preparing people to be able to meet the challenges of what they're being asked to do. So we do recommend that you try to hold multiple in-person trainings. However, this is very difficult to do on a budget and on a tight timeline and in a big state or across a large geographic area. So often it is the case that campaigns will have one training for staff. It could be either virtual or in person if you can, and then one training for volunteers that would be virtual, or you could do regional trainings if you prefer to do that. I do want to highlight right now dry runs, which we'll talk about again in just a second. But we also really strongly recommend thinking about dry runs as a training opportunity. A lot of times, actually, sorry, I'm not sure if everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say dry runs. A dry run is when you have a canvas, you go out and you're knocking on doors, and you are practicing exactly what you plan to do during early vote and on election day. So you are kind of pretending like it's a very high pressure environment to get everyone used to how the scripts are gonna go, how their canvas launch is gonna go, etc. We recommend doing this at least 2 times. I think 3 times. The first time the staff are doing the dry run and they're getting their own practice first, so that by the time the volunteers come for the dry run, the staff kind of really understand how things should go. So it could be a regular canvas that staff are doing a little bit of reporting, etc., as a dry run. And then think of it as an opportunity to find holes. You're looking for leaks with a dry run. So you're almost always going to find a gap in training, or maybe people don't have access to a certain document, etc. This is exactly what a dry run is for. This is why we do them. Okay. Take another quick second to look through the document, skim it, and put a plus in the chat if you feel like you've skimmed through the whole thing and you're kind of familiar with how it's laid out. Cool. Okay. Drop in the chat, are there any sections that you feel like you're not going to use on your campaign? Everybody's using every single section. Brendan said phone calls. Delete, if you're not running a phones program, delete that section. You can add it back in later if you decide to change your mind. Trim it, because this is a monster of a section. You might need them all. Okay, let me ask you a few more questions then. Let's look at staffing structure. So if you have a small team, it's just you and your candidate, will the staffing structure change? David, would you care to share? You don't have to. You just were so emphatic. I thought maybe you would want to.
Oh, you didn't want me to type it out.
No, go ahead, say it.
If it's me and the candidate, I don't need to, I can quick type out our roles, but I don't need hiring plan. I don't need an org chart. I don't need those things. I keep it simple. We meet, our meeting structure will be knocked out very quickly. And so it's just for two people, we don't need to spend extra time planning just to document as if we had a large campaign.
Yeah, I agree with you. Spend your time thinking through strategy, etc. If you want to document it and you have that kind of time, go off, you know? Let's look at this next thing. Boiler room. Where is your boiler room going to be? Put a plus in the chat if you are planning to rent a boiler room space for GOTV. Ooh. Taylor, I might ask you to share a little bit about that in just a second. I'll give you some time to think about if you want to. Okay. I thought it was going to be 4. Okay, let's quickly talk about what boiler room is, and then we'll talk about whether or not we need to plan for it. So the idea that you would need to have like a centralized hub, a location where kind of there's like a hive mind kind of scenario. Boiler rooms are typically in the headquarters of an operation, and these are going to be larger operations typically. Typically, you'll have a few canvases running at the same time, and you would want to keep your campaign manager and your organizing director and your data director and your comms team all together in one place, so that if a situation comes up on election day or during GOTV, you can make decisions really fast about how to respond to that situation. there's a lot of information that you need to know about how to set up a boiler room, but you might not actually need to plan to have a boiler room if you have an office and that office has Wi-Fi and you have a place to be. So if those things are true for you, you can take it out. If you are a 2-person team and you know that you and your candidate are going to be vote tripling on election day or something like that, again, you probably don't need a boiler room and you can take it out. Okay. Let's look through any other sections that might not apply to everyone. Anybody curious if a section would be applicable or what a section is talking about? Oh, yes. Jason, thank you for remembering. All right, so let's talk about the coordination section. Coordination is thinking about how your team is going to be interacting with voters on election day, how other people are going to be interacting with voters on election day and leading up to election day, and how your efforts can either intermesh or sometimes how your efforts can stay apart from each other so there's just not overlap. So the first thing you want to think about is, who are your external partners? You have other people who are doing the work in the space, your county party, State House caucus, other organizations, etc. So you need to decide how you're going to communicate your plans with them. Are you going to have a call to talk about it? Are you going to do it regularly? Are you going to just leave each other alone and hope for the best? Are you too busy? Etc. This is kind of the first thing to think about. The good news is, if you are thinking about it right now, all the way 60, 70 days out almost, you have time to come up with a coordination plan. So that's great. You probably want one person to just be the point person for external partners. So think through how that's going to look. A huge place for coordination is voter protection. A lot of times the state party is responsible for running a voter protection hotline. They'll probably have a voter protection team that are maybe going to be coordinating poll watching. Maybe they're going to be recruiting attorneys to be on staff to answer questions and give legal advice, etc. It is a lot of work for your campaign to do all of that same work. And then you're going to be competing for attorney volunteers. You're going to be spending a lot of resources trying to figure out how to do this. So voter protection is a place where it is extremely beneficial to coordinate with a larger organization, a state party, for example, and make sure that you have a plan to bring concerns up a chain so that people can be aware of them, and you're not responsible for necessarily addressing every single voter's concern. You can kind of hand them off to people who are trained and specialized to do that. Same thing with hotline. I'll also add that rides to the polls and ballot chase are also other really good places for coordination. You can add capacity by volunteering or sending volunteer shifts to staff a hotline for a little while if you have highly skilled volunteers, or you can add capacity by sending folks to do ballot chase, but you might not want to run those programs in-house because they're highly specialized. They take a lot of coordination to set up, and typically you need a lot of capacity to run them. Okay, any questions here? Cool. We've been going for what, an hour and 10? Sorry, can I get a time check?
Correct. We've been going for an hour and 10 minutes exactly.
Okay, awesome. So we are going to take a quick break, a little brain break for you, if you will. And then when we come back, we have just a few more sections to talk through and then an exercise. So let's take 10 minutes right now. Do what you need to do. Come back. at 2:50 Eastern Time. See you in a moment. I'm ready, Freddie. Let's do it. Okay, so just a few quick things. Hope you had a great break. A few quick things to highlight that we didn't have a chance to talk about when we were just looking through, but these are literally just copy pasted. I just wanted to make sure not to forget to say these things. So the first one is staging locations. There is a whole section in the plan for just staging locations. If you plan to use staging locations, which are different places that you would launch different canvases happening at the same time, you need to really start thinking about staging locations now, because there's a whole process that you'll have to put in place for identifying staging locations and vetting them. So if you have like an inkling of an idea, I want to do staging locations this time, now is the time to start thinking about how that's going to look. And one common mistake that we see is people putting off thinking about staging locations until they need the staging locations, and it's actually quite time intensive to find and vet and approve those things. Another common mistake that we see on campaigns, and it can get a little bit sticky sometimes, is not ordering literature on time. So think about, okay, when do you actually need the literature? You're going to need it for your first dry run. Think about when you're going to need to purchase that literature, and not only how you're going to purchase it, but how you're going to get it to the people that need it. Because if you purchase it from a printer and it all goes to one place, then unfortunately you're going to have to take it from that place and move it to other places too. And I see a question in the chat, is this set of slides linked somewhere? Yes, it is. It is in your drive. And all of these slides that have a lot of text on them are literally copy pasted out of the GOTV Plan document. Any questions about literature or staging locations before we move on? Okay. Supply, purchase, and distribution. Again, this is not formatted, it's just copy pasted. The thing to highlight here, a common pitfall that we see, is not doing an inventory. If you don't know what supplies you already have, you cannot figure out what supplies you need to order. Not having an up-to-date inventory adds a lot of time onto your purchasing timeline. So make sure, as a little bit of pre-work for you, do an inventory now and commit to keeping it up to date. As an operations person, please do this. And then a few quick other things. On the operations side, think about who is going to be responsible for approving purchase orders, especially if you have multiple people in the field and you're giving them discretion to purchase their own supplies for their offices, etc. You'll need to have an approval process for that. So think through what you want that approval process to be. And then similarly, if you're going to have a reimbursement policy for GOTV specifically, for example, if somebody is at a canvas and a whole bunch of volunteers shows up and they don't have enough clipboards or something like that, are you going to reimburse them if they go to an office supply store and purchase some? Thinking about these little things now means that you're able to think about them when you're not super tired, you're not super busy, and you can actually plan out a procedure rather than just dealing with things one-off as they come up. Oh yeah, I see in the chat, we're talking about unboxing the literature and bundling it up. Yeah, I've been there. There's a whole literature timeline. Okay, Next thing to think about is reporting. So I do want to highlight that we have some reporting tools that can help you. We have this staging location report tool that includes a Google form that you can report on, and also a guide to staging location. So I mentioned a vetting process, etc. You can use this tool if your interest is piqued by any of these things that we're talking about right now. We have this tool to help too. And this also includes volunteer management recommendations. So I heard, or I saw in the chat earlier, I can't remember who it was, somebody asking for volunteer management recommendations. We have this in Van. We also have some recommendations in a different section of the toolbox about how to manage them. And we'll talk about volunteer shift scheduling and recruitment, etc., in the data section. Okay. Yes. One more tool to highlight before we move on. We also have this GOTV turf tracker. So if you're going to be distributing packets, etc., please feel free, check out our turf tracker. It will generate a staging location report for you. And you can enter van packet data, etc. on it. Okay, I think that might be all of my toolbox plugs. Where are the tools? Are they linked in the GOTV plan guide? Yes, they are. So this is in the, which section am I talking about? The reporting section. So in your GOTV plan guide, go to the reporting section. This is not the way to do it. You're watching me struggle. I gotta keep going. There it is. Okay. So they're hidden down here in the reporting section, but all the ones that I just showed you are here in the reporting section, and you can check out the toolbox. And we have a whole GOTV section in the toolbox with all this there for you. Okay, I think, like I said, I think that those are all my toolbox plugs, but we'll find out, huh? Okay. Another just very quick common pitfall that we strongly suggest planning for. We often plan for election day, but we need to plan for shutdown, and specifically who is responsible. You'll need to have a point person on your team responsible for managing shutdown. If you have more than one office, you'll need to have someone who knows where the leases are, who knows where the utilities are coming out of, and all of those contracts, who has the accounts, who can cancel them, because nothing is worse than waking up on Wednesday and realizing that you have to do a bunch of paperwork and you don't even know where the lease is filed. So start thinking about gathering all of these kinds of operational documents, etc., so that you're ready to actually execute on these things. Okay, any questions about anything that we've talked about on the planning side so far? You can drop them in the Q&A box. Cool. Okay. So take a moment now. We've talked about this huge document. We've talked about how long it might take to plan. And I just want to remind you of our 4 key things: our calendar, our universe, our budget, and our tactics. We have a whole calendaring section coming soon, but you'll need to share whatever calendar you come up with other people and collaborate on it. So look ahead to next week. It's Labor Day week, or maybe the week after, in your calendar, and take a second right now, put some calendar holds on there, some good chunks of time, maybe 90 minutes, to work on your budget, to work on your calendar and your universe and your tactics. And put a plus in the chat when you've done that. Okay. It looks like we're getting up to critical mass. Also think maybe you should invite people, invite people to them so that you're not working on this by yourself and you have an opportunity to get feedback and think about things from a different perspective. Okay, so now we are at our last little exercise. We are gonna do some actual contingency planning. So if you want to pull up the contingency planning portion of your document, you're gonna have an opportunity right now to write out what your contingency plans are going to be for GOTV. If you're not currently on a race, think about what you would want to do if you were on a race. So we're gonna look at what we would do if we had a van outage. So if we're canvassing, we're out in the field and van stops working. If we find out that a polling place has closed, or if we find out there's long lines at a key polling place, there might be some additional scenarios. Maybe some things have happened to you. Maybe you're having flashbacks right now, thinking about things that have happened to you during GOTV. If that's you, then add in some additional scenarios and talk through those. We are gonna have about 15 minutes to get started on some scenario planning. We are gonna be in breakout groups of 6. That seems like a healthy number. And can I just confirm that someone's making the breakout rooms and I don't need to?
Yeah, I got it.
Cool, thank you. Whenever you're ready, we can open those up.
Okay, gonna be opening up rooms now.
Thank you.
And if anyone needs assistance getting into their breakout room, feel free to let us know. We'll help you get where you need to go.
Can you all hear Daisy?